Well, good morning or good afternoon once again. We welcome you again today to the Bible Beyond the Basics podcast. We are your hosts for today, Bob and Jason. We welcome you. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing today, Bob?
Doing great. Looking forward to this.
All right. So we've got a different topic. Last week we were kind of talking about some of the issues surrounding Genesis chapter 1 and creation and evolution and all those sorts of things. Today we're going to be talking about Genesis chapters 2 and 3, which are kind of a different story. If you ever have read those closely, you'll realize that there's at least two creation stories there at the beginning of the book of Genesis. So, the question for today is, did woman really come from man's rib?
I love it.
How do you like your ribs, Bob?
Usually with nice, barbecue sauce is good, but given my gallbladder these days, Jason,
you don't have a lot of ribs these days.
No, we're trying to cut back on that pork and sausage stuff. So, and here we are, talking about food. But well, this is the food for the soul. How about that for our really sentimental?
Sure. Is this, what kind of food is this? Is this fast food? Is this healthy? I don't.
Yeah. Well, now you're in the stuff I really love, because these chapters basically are the Yahweh's writer.
Yeah.
And he is actually this Yahweh school.
Bob's talking about an idea of how at least the Pentateuch was formed, the JEDP authorship, and going even further, and the different authors who wrote Scripture. And you can look throughout Scripture, at least in the Old Testament, you can see different pens at work, different ideas, different agendas, different people. And what we find is that in the Old Testament, all of this stuff has been put together right next to each other, different authors taking different ideas, and it's all been put in one area for us to look at. And Bob is talking about a particular school of thought.
Right. Yeah. Well, basically the format is, if I were to take Clive Cussler, John Steinbeck, Hemingway, Flannery O'Connor,
very different people.
Very different people. I could tell, who wrote what, if they were all put together in different pages. And that's kind of what the scholars have done with this story. The Yahweh's writer, unlike the priestly writer of Genesis 1, was deeply concerned about things from the earth up. We're going to find another one called the Elohist, who talks about God down, what God is doing. But the Yahwist was a really earthy kind of guy, school, who wanted to talk about, why are things the way they are? How did humanity begin? And by the way, also please note, there's some references in the chapter 2 that are a little puzzling, because he refers to rivers, and where are they? And we're talking about now lands outside the Garden of the land of Eden, where all this takes place. The garden, by the way, goes by another name called paradise. It's actually a Babylonian word, Persian word, which tells you something about when it may have been written. But we get that wonderful story of the God dipping into the dirt and forming out of the clod, which is a wonderful way to define this, out of the mud, the clod, and forming humanity, which is kind of what we are, because quite frankly, that's where we go back to. If you've ever seen rotting people or cremation, we all return to the earth. We're from the earth,
ashes, dust to dust,
earth to earth. Yeah. That's interesting. And then what happens is, breathes life into the nostrils, the pneuma, the spirit, in Greek pneuma, the breath of life, which, by the way, I've seen 3 times when my children are born. How about you?
Oh, absolutely. 3 times, yeah. But it's interesting how much of that language we think about this differentiation between spiritual and carnal, but the Hebrew people didn't even have a word for spiritual. everything was in some sense spiritual. Everything was in some sense connected to God.
The Greeks separated it and kind of destroyed it.
Yeah, but like the idea of like there's a sense in which God interacts with the carnal, God interacts with the worldly, and you see that very clearly in Genesis chapter 2. Carnal meaning like meat, like chili con carne.
Yeah.
God creating the flesh.
Well, I am even more blunt and basic. Like a good Yahwist, God is completely useless without flesh. Which might give you a concept of the incarnation, which is happening right here. So the clod is formed, the breath goes in, the breath animates the life. Why? Because the first thing we do as babies when we're born and umbilical cord cut is the breath enters us and we become self-independent, efficient, animated, individual, independent. I saw the opposite when my dog was killed. We put down, and I was holding him, and the needle went in, and all of a sudden, he breathed his last, and all of a sudden, that dog which had fiber became putty. It is the breath that gives the fiber to our lives. And because the first thing I've done in my life will be breathe in, the last thing I'm going to do is breathe out.
And it's amazing, all of the things that we have created in this world, all of the inventions we've made, all of the things we synthesize. But the one thing that it seems we can't do is create that breath, create that life.
Yeah. Despite Frankenstein's attempts with electricity. That's another story, because that was about the Ubermensch. Anyway, talking about your superheroes from last week.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, getting into the language, and this is really good biblical scholars have done this. So, by the way, the earth is called Hadamah in Hebrew, Hadamah. And out of the Hadamah becomes this clod that gets breath, and then is called Hadam. We in English call it Adam. So out of the earth comes the earthling.
Yeah.
And the earthling then starts naming things. I'm going to get back to that when I start talking about my grandbaby Eve. Okay?
Yeah.
Starts naming things and starts taking kind of control. And wow, this is interesting. And starts discovering life, but doesn't find an equal. And so what happens? We have to have something that is an equal, a helpmeet, a true partner, a complement. Because quite frankly, the Adam is alone. I like my dogs. I have several. I like my cats. Well, not as much as my dog, but but they're not my partners.
Yeah,
they're not my partners. Animals cannot be. The plants. I can't. I'm not a tree whisperer. But also back in the first part, trees were simply expressions of the earth. Anyway, that's another story.
And that's the whole idea. From the very beginning, it's not, there are all of these things that are quote unquote subservient to Adam.
Right.
But he's not looking for someone who's going to be subservient. He's looking for someone to be an equal with. And it's right there, right in the language.
Yeah.
From the very beginning.
Yeah. It's marvelous. It's great poetry. I mean, this is just superb poetry. So what happens is that God realized, okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to put a deep sleep on the Hadam, and out of Hadam, we're going to have emerging from the interior soul of the Hadam, which we call the rib. You could call it also, tie it into the whole inner being. C.S. Lewis's idea, men with chest versus, you can't just have intellect and you just can't have, gonads. You've got to have a chest, a heart, and affection. So out of the deep source of who Adam is, you're going to get separation. You're going to get Ish and Isha. Now we get male and female. And the interesting thing, if you know your Spanish, okay, my amiga is that female friend. My amigo is that male friend. Both are friends. Both are equal. It's just that the A and the O differentiate them into bigender. In Spanish, Hebrew's the same. So out of Chadam, you get Ish, the male, and Isha, the female.
And even as you're talking about that there, it seems to me that the differentiation that's being made is just two different coins of humanity. It seems like two different complements to one another. The different genders interacting with one another. It can't all be held in one form, and so there's this way of being human, and there's this way of being human.
Yes, because basically, and I'm keeping a track. I've got a few more minutes here. Okay, keeping track. We do everything animals do. We are no different than animals. We eat, we poop, we procreate. Basically that's what all animals do. We do the same thing. However, we know who we are. A dog doesn't know a dog is a dog. A cow doesn't know a cow is a cow. We do. The Ish and Isha know who they are. They each have minds. They each have affections. They each have genitals. They are complementary, as you say. That's a beautiful word. And in that union, that oneness, you have self-awareness also. Although, and this is part of the curse of humanity, I am self-aware that I am me, and as close as I can get to my partner, I will never, ever truly know what she feels and what she believes. The only way we ever understand anything is through words, whether words spoken by my wife to me or by when she speaks to me or does something, I interpret it and have meaning with the words because unlike animals, we have reason.
And I mean, I think that gets into so much of what it means to be human. Here you have the separation between genders, but there's also, I mean, if we don't think about it as the story of just this is scientifically how man and woman were created, which is the way you can look at things with a literal interpretation, but this idea of conception of different human beings who are equal but not one. And I mean, if we can talk in that way, there are so many separations amongst, and there's more creation stories coming up too. And I don't know how many we're going to get into, but one of my friends always talked to me about the Tower of Babel. And he always said to me that was one of the ways that for them, that fall of the Tower of Babel was more of a false story than anything else because the language separated. And these people who were equal but yet separate had to go their own ways. We can't know their experiences either. We can't know, we can't truly put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's a different race, a different ethnicity, a different gender, a different sexual orientation, perhaps even religion, or you could go so many different ways. But this story reminds us that we're all equal. We're all from the same place. We're all from the same Adam.
And I have a hard enough time even understanding myself. But the problem is, I know that. It is this knowledge. And that gets us into a couple of different formats. So we have God creating the Adam out of the Adam. We get the Adam out of which the very essence of its being emerges, Ish and Isha. And then we get their life together. And we get them knowing each other. Not yet fully, because, intellectually, sexually, and all that sort of stuff, that takes time, because I am fully convinced that what the poetry of the Taoist writer is describing is the story of children growing up. The children are growing up, and they're discovering who they are. And the best way I can describe it is my daughter, who escaped one day when she was 2 years old from the bathtub because mommy was at the supermarket down the block. And there is my little buck-naked Margaret standing in front of our First Church's post office, waving at everybody in the neighborhood. So why is it that at a certain stage in a child's life they become aware they are naked? That is our self-awareness. Why is it my little Eve, who is now at that 22-month thing, beginning to understand some things to the point where, among her first words, the most common first word of babies is no. Or
self-awareness.
Self-awareness, self-consciousness. You're aware of choices. And jealousies. Because if we FaceTime too much with Isaac James, who is her 4-month-old little brother, she gets upset to the point where she wants to grab the phone. She's jealous. So what is happening as we grow older and older and we mature and we become aware of what we want to name the world? We want control over the world. And now we want control over ourselves. And that's going to cause a whole lot of problem. Because we tend to make bad choices because we're scared, we're afraid, we don't want to be lonely. We don't understand how we fit into the scheme, and eventually that's going to be why Abraham has to turn around and come into the scene in order to rescue us. And so the idea that the tree of life, I fully believe that that was a gift to us. We ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Oh, now I know something's bad. See, before as a child, they don't know it's bad until they're told it's bad. They don't know running out in the street is bad because they might get hurt.
Yeah.
They have to be taught. Oh, that's self-awareness and that's self-knowledge. And so I think that the reason we got kicked out of the garden, poetically described, from the garden in the land of Eden, was to save us from living forever. Eating from the tree of life. And so, hence...
Eternally being children.
Eternally being children, which is cool, but you're not aware you're a child. You have glimmers, but you go back to that from now and go, it's retrospective. So to me, the whole story, and we can get into the Satan and the serpent, all that sort of stuff at another time, because that's simply a device. And the Satanos actually was an office of the adversary to provide us choices. And we tend to make bad choices. And then we start blaming each other. Then we realize we're naked. And God has to clothe us. And what does God clothe us with? He kills something. It's no longer fig leaves, which, by the way, is probably the tree, the fig tree, because they didn't have apple trees back then, that kind that we know. Probably a fig tree. And so, to me, the expulsion from the land...
Could be olives.
Yeah, olive tree, from the land of garden, was our blessing. Because if you notice, we're not cursed. The snake is. We're not cursed. The ground is, because now it's going to be tough. It's not going to always produce good things. We have to work. We have to work hard. And birth is going to be painful.
I have children who are various ages, our oldest one being 9, our youngest one being 2. And our 2-year-old is still fascinated by everything that surrounds her in life.
Adam and Eve.
And she just approaches the world with curiosity, and everything is approached from a positive mindset.
Yeah.
And I have my 9-year-old who, she's starting to realize some of the weight and the pressure of the world.
Yeah.
She's starting to tell me things like, I don't know if I want to grow up. I don't know. I like being a kid. I like having people just hold me or telling me everything's okay or not having these certain particular responsibilities. And she's coming to the realization that with age comes responsibility. With age comes being able to, your emotions grow and evolve, but then you have to learn to understand how to deal with your emotions as they grow in complexity.
Yeah. You mean no one's going to take care of my poop? I got to take care of my own poop. I got to make my own sandwich. So you can really see what the poetry is about the story. And I got to get three things in, if I may. Okay,
go ahead.
Okay, number one, what does Eve mean? And the likeliest source of what Eve means, so that now that Adam has become a name, Eve needs a name because we name things. Eve, and my grandbaby Eve is named Eve, and it means life. And one of the reasons my daughter and her husband chose the name Eve, it was back in 2019, when the world was pretty lousy. And they weren't sure what world they were birthing their baby into. And so they named her Eve as a sign of promise and hope, which is what Eve is. It means life. Second, as we're going to get into next week when we talk about Cain and where he found his wife, we get Adam and Eve now having fun called yada, yada, yada. Now, that's that knowledge business. Yada is the Hebrew word for knowing. And the Hebrews, as you pointed out, Jason, knowing was not an intellectual exercise.
No.
It means full encounter. And so yada is the word we would basically use also for sexual intercourse, which, by the way, I'm fully sure Jerry Seinfeld, who I never saw an episode one from, and that yada, yada, yada is basically a euphemism, folks. So you better be careful how you're actually saying it because a good Hebrew would know. Okay. The last thing is that I really want to highlight, so that you can highlight.
Yeah.
For me, one of the best ways to understand the story of Adam and Eve is to read the Diary of Adam and Eve by Mark Twain. Because in his story, Eve drives Adam nuts because she's always talking and always messing things up and confusing and making him do things. Sounds familiar. And so, but when she eats, follows the serpent's advice to choice and eats the apple to the story. Adam is given the choice not to be expelled with her. Mm-hmm. But she's going to be expelled. And Twain finishes it by saying, Adam finally realizes, I would miss her voice. I would rather be outside the garden with her than inside the garden without her.
It's beautiful.
That's the story of Adam and Eve.
Also strikes me as ironic that it's a man writing it and blames the woman.
Well, yeah.
Guy didn't do anything wrong, but the woman, I guess I'll follow her.
Well, Mark Twain.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, this week. What are we doing next week, Bob?
Oh, thank you. Where did Cain find his wife? And I would say, by the way, let's follow Occam's razor on that one.
Adam only had so many ribs, and his insides were not very well protected by the time this was all done.
Yeah, so we're talking about what happens outside the garden and all that sort of stuff, but focusing on Cain and his wife. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.